Republican leaders are going after the Department of Justice over a lenient sentence for a Black Lives Matter arsonist with a lengthy rap sheet. They say the DOJ has taken a startling turn for the worse under the Biden administration, accusing it of injecting left-wing political bias into its treatment of violent criminals. This after 26-year-old Montez Lee pleaded guilty to one federal count of arson during the George Floyd protests in Minnesota. And instead of getting up to 20 years behind bars, he got half of that. Even though, at 30 years old, a dad had died during that arson attack. He was tragically killed when the pawn shop went up in flames. And as we said, Lee had quite the long rap sheet, packed with 15 criminal records and multiple convictions, including burglary, domestic assault, and theft. And he was under a criminal sentence at the time of the 2020 arson. I'm going to come to you first, Emily, and just lean on your legal acumen for where we should be in this case. There's been a lot of outcry. Well, he only got half the sentence. Talk to me about what he faced and what he got.
Right, so the maximum sentence guidelines there were 20 years, and federal prosecutors sought 12. And I think why that shocks the conscious, why so many people were so upset about it, is because, like I often talk about, the system works because every player in that system represents a different function. You want the advocate for the defendant, the advocate for reducing the sentence, to be the public defender, to be the defense attorney. You don't want the prosecutor to say, well, quote, by the way, I'm quoting from the brief, because the protests were mostly peaceful, that's one thing that should go in his favor. The reason the felony murder rule exists, by the way, is so that when someone engages in an inherently dangerous and chaotic, uncontrollable felony like arson, it accounts for the fact that someone may die. So this guy saying, I didn't mean to, doesn't matter. And when the federal prosecutors added up, well, 2 points for the fact that he was under criminal sentencing for assault and 3 points for this, I don't care. Because the guidelines after all of that math was 10 to 20 years, and they still only sought 12. And by the way, they said in the brief, they generously said, well, he maintains he checked the building before lighting it on fire to make sure no one was there. But what I saw on video was this guy saying, F this place, we're going to burn this blank down.
Wow.
That to me is not the words of someone who checked a building for a 30-year-old father who died in the blaze. He should have got 20 years. This is an abomination of that federal prosecutor.
You know, I want to bring this in. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has said that he's now putting on hold the nominee for the U.S. Attorney on Minnesota. Let's watch.
I just had to place a hold on a nominee to be U.S. Attorney for Minnesota because the person recently acting in that job recommended an unusually soft sentence below the maximum guideline to a convicted fatal arsonist because the arsonist was taking part in a far-left political riot at the time.
Ari, this rising to Capitol Hill and that with Mitch McConnell.
Yeah, and you know, I would like to go beyond this. I would really like to see a long, strong breakdown of all the arsonists, all the looters, all the rioters from the summer of 2020 and what they got. How many DAs went easy on them because they thought it was a righteous cause, and therefore, because there was a peaceful protest somewhere else in that city, you were entitled to loot, you were entitled to burn, you were entitled to riot? No. And I'd also like to see that compared to the January 6th convictions and cases that are brought there. You just need to air these things. The public should hear about whether or not justice is fair. I have only one standard. If you broke the law, the book should be thrown at you. And especially when you break the law for violence, for rioting, for looting, for arson. And I don't think we've had a full, fair accounting yet of what's happened in the summer of 2020 sentencings. I think a lot of local DAs and statewide DAs, city DAs, have gone easy because we've seen across so many municipalities in America, Democrat DAs want to go easy. I'd like to see a full, fair, open accounting of all of those who were involved in the numerous attacks, and there were many. It was either the first or the second greatest amount of damage to the United States in history from civil disturbances. The only one that could have possibly been greater was the Los Angeles riots. And that's how the extent of this. 150 federal buildings, governmental buildings were attacked. It wasn't just the 10th precinct in Minneapolis.
That is true.
150. What
I
happened
could,
to
if
the
I could
people who
just point
attacked
out
those?
really
Yeah,
quick,
go
we
ahead,
do have
Karen.
an accounting from Portland where there were 96 cases brought by the Trump administration. 47 were prosecuted, so half of them were dropped, Harris, by the incoming DOJ. Quickly, I just want to say to your point about the peaceful protest, that was not peaceful for Oscar Stewart Jr., who was burned alive, a father of 4. Do you know he texted his mom and said, "I'm going to a protest, Mom"? They searched for him for 8 weeks until they found his remains. He's a father of 3, married his high school sweetheart. It was not peaceful for him. So it's so shameful to hear that the DOJ put that language in there. It was not peaceful for Oscar Stewart Jr.
And the sentencing, by the way, of those 47 referred cases, remember those were all reduced to things like community service and advocating community members to vote. So there wasn't even sentencing for those that were referred for actual prosecution. I mean, it's a joke. It's a complete letdown of our democratic society and of our criminal justice system.
You mentioned Oregon, and Kennedy, I know you have strong ties there.
Yeah, I was in the LA riots. I was living there. I'm from Portland. The U.S. Marshals can't get legal support, some of them, from their own Department of Justice. Andy Ngo, who was attacked several times in Portland by Antifa, none of those people have been arrested or charged, even though they know who they are. And Oscar Lee Stewart's life matters. It should matter. Yeah. And, you know, the guy who set the place on fire, you know, when you move it up to that level of active arson, that's no longer a peaceful protest. And that in and of itself should be a determination for equal justice under the law, which we are not seeing that applied to Ari's point.
Well, it's fascinating to see the most powerful Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, the leader, come out and say, you know what, I'm going to hold up a nomination over this because of the decision made by that AG in Minnesota.